Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Do you buy low-fat yogurt and skim milk and shun saturated fat? These are supposed to be healthy choices, but what if they're not? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
For decades, Americans have been told that cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease. Low-fat foods proliferated. Breakfast became cold cereal with skim milk instead of bacon and eggs. Lunch called for salad with low-fat dressing. But we Americans are fatter than ever. Are we doing something wrong?
Dr. Mark Hyman says that the type of fat we eat is critical to our health and our ability to get our weight under control.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, find out how to eat fat and get thin.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, an old anesthetic medication is getting new attention as a fast-acting way to reverse suicidal thoughts. Ketamine was first approved as an injectable general anesthetic in 1970. It's especially helpful for severe pain due to burns or emergency surgery. For the last several years, psychiatrists have been intrigued with ketamine's rapid-onset antidepressant activity. A new study from Columbia University Medical Center reports that ketamine infusions reverse thoughts of suicide faster than anything else available. The trial results were published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. The investigators compared ketamine to the sedative midazolam. 80 suicidal patients were randomly assigned to receive infusions of one drug or the other. The impact of ketamine was dramatic and fast. Some patients experienced a reduction in suicidal thoughts within a few hours. The benefits lasted for several weeks, while the subjects also received additional psychiatric counseling.
Homeopathy got its start around the turn of the 19th century. That's when the German physician Samuel Hahnemann published his Law of Similars. His idea was that like healed like. In other words, if someone was experiencing nausea and vomiting, they would benefit from taking a highly diluted dose of an herbal extract that causes nausea and vomiting. In homeopathy, dilution is a central tenet, and some preparations are so dilute that they contain little, if any, of the original active ingredient. Compared to the toxic drugs of that era, these homeopathic remedies were far less likely to cause complications. With the advent of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, the FDA was discouraged from regulating such preparations. Homeopathic medicines have become a big business and are sold in health food stores and pharmacies around the country. Now, the FDA is poised to crack down on homeopathic products. The commissioner says, "Our approach to regulating homeopathic drugs must evolve to reflect the current complexity of market by taking a more risk-based approach to enforcement. The agency will focus special attention on products aimed at babies and children. Last year, 10 children died and hundreds had adverse effects from over-the-counter homeopathic teething remedies. Homeopathic products are not the same as botanical medicines that actually contain active ingredients in pharmacological doses."
Ginkgo biloba has long been a popular herb in China. It's credited with promoting memory and fighting dementia, although most studies using a German extract of the tree have not provided convincing results. Chinese scientists have just published a study comparing aspirin alone to aspirin plus a different extract of ginkgo biloba in stroke survivors. They recruited 348 people who had just had an ischemic stroke and randomly assigned them to one of the treatment groups. Standardized tests were used to test cognitive ability after 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. Scores for people taking ginkgo biloba extract plus aspirin were significantly better than those for people taking aspirin alone. There were no differences in the adverse events. The researchers conclude that GBE in combination with aspirin treatment alleviated cognitive and neurological deficits after acute ischemic stroke without increasing the incidence of vascular events.
Over the past year, the health benefits of coffee have gotten a lot of attention. Now it's time for tea to take the spotlight. An epidemiological study suggests that people who drink hot black tea every day are less likely to develop glaucoma than those who don't like the stuff. Iced tea, decaf tea, and herbal tea don't seem to have the same link. Tea drinkers are about 74% less likely to have glaucoma, an eye disease in which excessive pressure inside the eye harms the optic nerve. The data came from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey of 2005 to 2006, with about 10,000 individuals participating. Such epidemiological data can never prove cause and effect relationships. The authors call for larger prospective studies of tea drinking and the risk of glaucoma. That said, a cup of hot tea a day poses little risk and just might offer benefits for eye health. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Lots of Americans have been struggling with their weight. At last count, more than 2/3 of adults are either overweight or obese. That's despite decades of advice to cut back on fat and increase exercise. What went wrong?
Could the recommendations for a healthy diet have backfired? That's the conclusion many health experts are now considering. It's also the premise of a new book, Eat Fat, Get Thin.
To learn more about this new and controversial approach, we turn to Dr. Mark Hyman. He's the Pritzker Foundation Chair and Director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. He's also the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. His books include The Blood Sugar Solution, Ultra Prevention, and Ultra Metabolism. His latest is Eat Fat, Get Thin, Why the Fat We Eat is the Key to Sustained Weight Loss and Vibrant Health.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Mark Hyman.
Thanks for having me.
It's always wonderful to have you on the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Hyman. You know, your new book is kind of controversial. I'm sure it wasn't by accident. Eat Fat, Get Thin. But, you know, since 1977, and probably long before that, there were recommendations, guidelines, experts who said, ooh, eating fat is bad for you. Butter, ooh, terrible. Eggs, evil. Margarine, heart healthy. How did the nutrition establishment get it so wrong for so long?
Well, there wasn't any malice or bad intent. It was just bad science. In the 50s, Ansel Keys was a scientist who said, gee, we should look for the causes of heart disease because it's increasing. So he began to look at a whole bunch of countries and correlations where they were eating fat and other things. And they found that, gee, when he looked at 7 countries that consumed a lot of fat, the ones who had more fat had more heart disease. The problem was he kind of was selective. He left out some of the other countries. There were 22 countries for which there were data at the time, and those countries didn't stack up according to his theory. For example, Holland and Norway had a lot of fat, but no heart disease. France, Spain, Switzerland, a lot of fat, no heart disease. So it didn't kind of all fit. And these were correlation data. It wasn't proving anything. It was just showing correlation. I could do a study saying, you know, if women have sex over 50, there's no association with pregnancy, so sex doesn't cause pregnancy. It doesn't actually prove that. It's just how you stack up the data. So then we kind of went on that bandwagon, and the American Heart Association bought into it. And they started doing more work on this, and then the government says, we got to do something. And on very shaky ground, they didn't even look at the randomized controlled trials at the time. They just looked at the population data, which doesn't prove cause and effect. They ignored the randomized controlled data, which can show more of a cause and effect. And they basically came up with these guidelines to cut our fat and increase our carbs. And guess what? America listened. And it was kind of a disaster. In fact, when you look at the trends, especially, you know, after 1980, when these guidelines happened, the rates of diabetes skyrocketed, 7-fold increase. The rates of obesity skyrocketed. We now have almost 70% of Americans overweight. And in 1992, we made it even worse because we came up with the infamous food pyramid, where we were told to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta a day. I mean, 11 servings of bread a day that was considered healthy. And fats and oils, we were told to eat those only sparingly. They were at the tippy top of the pyramid. The problem is we got it upside down.
Upside down. So we should be eating more calories from fat than from carbs?
Absolutely. When we look at volume, most of our diet should be carbs. Volume meaning plant foods, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, avocados. Those are plant foods that should form the bulk of our diet and much of our plate. However, by calories, because fat's very calorie dense, much of our calories should be coming from fat, up to 40, 50, 60% fat. That's fine. And there's been no evidence that, one, it causes you to gain weight, or two, that it's linked to heart disease.
Well, let's talk about heart disease, because I think the idea that fat, particularly saturated fat, is linked to heart disease is going to be very hard for some people to
shake off, right?
Exactly right.
But this is so entrenched. It is 50 years. First
of all, the world is flat. Really, it looks flat.
Yeah. But first of all, it was cholesterol. Mr. Cholesterol used to pop up in the middle of meals on television commercials for margarine. Yeah. And so Americans kind of figured, okay, eggs are bad. We get that. Cholesterol is going to clog our coronary arteries. But right behind cholesterol, and now maybe even in front of cholesterol, was the saturated fat devil. Mm-hmm. Because if you ate saturated fat, you were doomed.
Absolutely.
And just go to the dairy section of your supermarket. There's the no-fat, low-fat yogurt. It dominates.
Yeah, low-fat foods have been killing us for decades, and we're finally figuring that out. And this isn't just my opinion. The new 2015 dietary guidelines were released in January, and guess what they showed? They showed that we should forget about cholesterol. They said it's no longer a nutrient of concern. Take back your whole eggs. It's okay to have whole eggs. And they also said there's no limit on total fat in the diet, because it's not correlated with heart disease. There was a huge review last year in the Annals of Internal Medicine. They looked at 600,000 people, 19 countries. They looked at, 72 studies, and they found there was no correlation with total fat or even saturated fat on heart disease. Another big review of 350,000 people over 23 years, published by Dr. Ronald Krauss, found that there was no correlation with saturated fat and heart disease. So in the context of a diet that's high carb, that's high refined carb in a sense, sugar, flour, starch, fat and that combo is bad. I call that sweet fat. So that's what America typically eats. Think of donuts, French fries, ice cream. Those are sweet fats. Those are bad. But if you take out the refined carbs and sugar and you have saturated fat without that, it doesn't really seem to be an issue. In large observational trials, in interventional trials, I picked up one study when I was reviewing the book. I found that there was a diet that showed 86 grams of saturated fat. That's almost half of your calories as saturated fat. There was no impact on blood levels of saturated fat. The ratio of the total to cholesterol to HDL got better. The triglycerides got better. Insulin got better. Inflammation got less. Weight went down. I wouldn't eat that much saturated fat, but it was just fascinating to see when you actually did that, what happened.
Well, I think something that you've just said is really important. What you said is the saturated fat that you're eating does not change the amount of saturated fat that's floating around in your bloodstream. So saturated fat in your bloodstream probably isn't great for your heart. But I think a lot of people have made that connection. They cook the lamb chop in the frying pan, and then they look after you take the lamb chop out, the fat that's left over.
Right.
It gets hard. And people say, that's what's making your arteries harden.
Well, it looks like, the fat on your body looks like the fat you eat. It's connected, but the fat in your arteries looks like the fat you eat. But science isn't that simple. And, science evolves, and we've learned so much. We used to think that, your total cholesterol was the issue. Then we thought your LDL was the issue. Now we're smarter than that. We know that it's actually the ratio of total to HDL. That's the good cholesterol. And even more importantly, there's different types of LDL and HDL. There's large, puffy, fluffy ones, and there's small, dense, hard ones. And guess what makes your cholesterol pattern the kind that causes heart attacks? That's called atherogenic cholesterol. It's sugar and refined carbs and starch. That's what causes high triglycerides, low HDL, gives you the small, dense, dangerous particles that bust into your arteries and cause damage, whereas saturated fats actually make you have large, light, fluffy particles. They raise the HDL and the total, so you even get better ratio most of the time.
Now, I have to tell you, my mother never gave up butter.
Good for her.
She is like, margarine, it just doesn't taste as good. I don't want to cook with margarine.
We got that wrong.
So, she just flat out rejected that advice. But there are a lot of people who bought into it. The margarine
I ate Flashman's margarine my whole childhood.
Absolutely, and a lot of people did.
Oh, well, it was margarine, it was skim milk, it was hardly ever any eggs when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s because my dad had high cholesterol.
So I'm just imagining that literally tens of millions of Americans are feeling betrayed. It's like, wait a minute, this is a giant flip-flop.
It is a flip-flop. It's a complete 180 about face, and it's confusing. It's confusing for most doctors. It's confusing for nutritionists. It's confusing for the average person because the science is so muddled, and we're hearing contradictory things. So how do you make sense of it all? And that's really, I've read through thousands of papers and looking at this in great detail because guess what? I want to live to be 120, so I don't want to be eating butter or having meat or having things like eggs if they're going to cause me harm. I want to also give my patients the things that are going to create health for them. And so as a practicing physician, I get to try this out on people and see what happens. And it's stunning when you actually see the impact of taking out the refined carbs and sugar, increasing the good fats. People's bodies really respond.
I remember the big controversy about the French paradox. What was it, 20, 30 years ago? And there were all these cardiologists and health professionals in the U.S. going, well, no, we don't believe
Must be
that.
the wine.
Must be something else.
Well, yes, wine was one of the hypotheses.
But I don't think that's what it is. I think it was
the French never gave up butter.
No, never gave up butter.
Or cheese.
Or cheese, yeah. In fact, they had very high-fat diets, and the Mediterranean diets are 40+% fat, olive oil. Those actually showed benefit. The Leon Heart study, which showed a reduction of 73% in heart disease, that was giving people more fat and good fats.
And these were high-risk patients.
Yeah, high-risk patients, exactly. The Predimed study just came out a couple of years ago, which looked at, in Spain at giving people olive oil and nuts and seeds or a lower-fat diet. They gave people a liter of olive oil a week to drink or eat, and a big handful of nuts every day, which, of course, nuts are fattening, and we thought. But when we looked at the data after 4 years, they literally had to stop the study because the people who weren't getting the olive oil and the nuts were dying. It was that powerful an impact. So, it wasn't really that we need to be on a low-fat diet. We've got that all wrong.
So how do we convince all of the nutrition experts who have been peddling the low-saturated fat approach for the last 50 years and your colleagues to change? Because it's sometimes hard to get that ocean liner to change course.
It is. I mean, I've spoken to Steve Nissen, who's the chief of cardiology at Cleveland Clinic, about how do we do research. We're going to need $100 million or more to do research to really do an interventional trial, do it well, and show what works and what doesn't. So I think the take-homes are pretty clear. I think that if you look at the things that are causing harm in terms of heart disease, diabetes, even cancer, this latest study showing cancer is increased by eating refined carbs and sugar, that's really the driver of most of the problems. It's not the fat. And I think, as I said, most associations, most governments now have eliminated any restriction on total fat. They still are suggesting saturated fat's an issue, but I think that tide is also going to change. We used to think cholesterol is a problem. Now we don't. We're just sort of moving slowly.
You're listening to Dr. Mark Hyman, director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. His most recent book is Eat Fat, Get Thin.
After the break, we'll talk about the long-term implications of reducing fat in our diets, and we'll find out why the experts seem to be reversing their position on fat.
What about nuts?
And should we think about sugar as if it were a recreational drug?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number is 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you would like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 1030. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're discussing the controversial idea that weight control could be more readily achieved by eating fat rather than avoiding it. Our guest is Dr. Mark Hyman. He's the Pritzker Foundation Chair and Director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. He's also the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. His books include The Blood Sugar Solution, Ultra Prevention, and Ultra Metabolism. His latest is Eat Fat, Get Thin, Why the Fat We Eat is the Key to Sustained Weight Loss and Vibrant Health.
Dr. Hyman, what are the long-term implications of following the recommendations that we've had for so many decades of really reducing fat as much as possible? Can they be reversed?
Well, we are in the long-term implications already. We are there. 1 in 2 Americans has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. We're seeing the obesity rate skyrocket. Children, 40% rate of overweight in kids, and little kids are getting fatty liver and, having diabetes. I saw a report the other day. There was a 3.5-year-old that had type 2 or adult onset diabetes. So we're in the crisis right now, and it's actually getting worse. I'm at the Cleveland Clinic as a director of the Center for Functional Medicine, and in Cleveland, we just had the obesity rates going up, one of the 5 states where the obesity rates are continuing to rise. So we're there, and it's really a result of this information that carbs were good and fat was bad. And guess what? If you take fat out of food, how do you make it taste good? You have to put in something, and the something is sugar. And it's in everything. It's 80% of foods that are made by corporations and factories have sugar added to them. And this is really the problem. We have a sort of a schizophrenic view based on the new dietary guidelines, which on the one hand say, for the first time, thank God, we should reduce our added sugars to less than 10% of our calories, which is still a lot. The World Health Organization says 5%. But on the other hand, the FDA doesn't make it possible to know what's in our food because the labeling laws don't allow us to say added sugar, which the corporations don't want us to have on there. And if you actually had a label that said, gee, you're having, on your soda, 500% of your daily recommended dose of sugar, that's a problem. So we really need clear labeling. We need to Yeah,
it's not just soft drinks. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, most people now know there's a lot of sugar in soft drinks, but they may not understand how much sugar there is in bread.
No, and bread. I mean, the glycemic index of bread is worse than table sugar, but it's your low-fat, healthy morning yogurt has more sugar than a can of soda. Your Prego tomato sauce has more sugar than 2 Oreo cookies. So we really are having low-fat salad dressing is made with high fructose corn syrup. So it's in everything.
And there was just a study published in BMJ Open that showed that about actually more than half of the calories in the American diet, this is based on NHANES research, more than half of the calories in the American diet come from ultra-processed foods that supply almost 90% of the added sugar that we're eating.
It's true. I mean, the 2 most prominent food sources are refined oils in the form of soybean oil. That's about 10% of our calories. And high fructose corn syrup, which is about 15% of our calories. That's like a quarter of our diet from highly processed industrial foods that we know are problematic and cause heart disease, diabetes, and obesity.
Now, you mentioned diabetes not once but a couple times.
I did.
And, it is a major epidemic in this country and around the world, let's face it. The American Diabetes Association is still very big on carbs.
They are. It's pretty surprising. I mean, there's such a lag time between science and practice, between science and policy. And it's unfortunate because people are dying. I mean, I had a patient recently who lost 50 pounds, got off her insulin by eating a very high-fat diet, restricting most of the carbs in her diet, and the body responds dramatically when you do that. If people are carbohydrate intolerant, which is actually something a lot of Americans are, meaning it's not like they look at a bagel and they get fat, basically because they're more likely to produce more insulin, those people, and it's a lot of us, actually can't tolerate a lot of starch and sugar.
When you think about what teenagers love, what is it? It's pizza.
Yeah, of course.
It's pasta.
Potato chips.
It's all of those
We're
chips.
programmed to love those. We're programmed biologically to crave and love sugar. It's how our bodies work. If we can eat anything sweet, because everything in sweet in nature is not going to kill you. That's just a fact. If it's bitter, it might, but if it's sweet, it's healthy to eat. And second, it increases fat storage. So if you're a hunter-gatherer and you find something sweet, you want to eat as much of it as you can. So our bodies are programmed to crave and eat sugar and starch whenever we can because it stores fat, and that fat is going to save you in a lean winter. But, problem is we just keep eating all winter in America.
Yeah, we're not likely to have those famines that occurred 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So how do we retrain our teenagers, for example, to shun all those processed carbs? I mean,
well, it's tough. It's going to require massive effort. In fact, working with the current Surgeon General, with sports and celebrities, music celebrities, to create a campaign to bring a different message to our citizens, to our children, about what is healthy or not healthy. When sports and celebrity icons are promoting sodas and junk food and fast food restaurants, that's really damaging to our population, and particularly our kids who are suffering disproportionately. So I think we need a massive public campaign. We need everybody to come together on this. And I think there are pockets where it's starting to happen. There's a food movement. It's slow, but I think it's starting to happen.
Well, in fact, since nutrition experts and primary care physicians and even cardiologists have been warning us for so many years that we should be avoiding fat and we should be eating carbs, and even encouraging people to eat trans fats like margarine, doing the reversal kind of undermines their credibility, doesn't it?
It kind of does, but I think people just have to fess up and say, look, science is a changing target, and here's what we thought. Now we have better data. We have to listen to the data, and I think the data will help us change the story. And I think it's happening. I even met with Steve Nissen talking about these issues, and I said, Steve, I'm sort of preparing a book on fat. I was kind of sheepish because I thought, he's going to be kind of critical. And he said, no, Mark, we got the whole story wrong on fat. We even probably got the story wrong on saturated fat. And then he said, I'm writing an article for the Annals, and he wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal recently challenging our current guidelines, looking at the need for more and better research.
Now, Steve Nissen is one of the world's foremost cardiologists at the Cleveland Clinic and has been talking about these very issues for the last 30 or 40 years. So when he says, oops, we made a mistake.
Yes.
You can take that to the bank. Now, when you talk about fat, I mean, again, your book is Eat Fat, Get Thin, but not all fat is created equal. My mama loved macadamia nuts.
Those are good. I like those too.
and people say, oh, that's so bad because it's got saturated fat in it. You shouldn't eat those nuts. So tell us about nuts. Tell us about fat. Where's the good fat? Where's the fat we should avoid?
Well, there's the good fat, the bad fat, and the ugly fat. So the ugly fat, we've been talking about trans fats. The FDA finally said these are not safe to eat. They should be out of all food substances, but they're not yet. They gave the food companies a lot of runway to get them out of food, so make sure you read the label for hydrogenated. That should never cross your lips. Then there's the good fats that everybody does agree with. Those are things like the monounsaturated fats, olive oil, avocados, many nuts like almonds, high in monounsaturated fats, seeds, and those are all good. Even eggs now are on the good list for most people. So those are all great. And then the fish. Wild fatty fish, salmon, sardines, omega-3 fats, everybody agrees with that. And then there's the kind of controversial areas we've been talking about, saturated fat and refined vegetable oils or omega-6 fats. So we talked about saturated fat. I think I'm going to park that. The omega-6 oils are something that we've never eaten in the quantity we're eating. They've gone up 1,000, some say 10,000-fold in the last 100 years because we never refined vegetable oils before except olive oil. And that's pretty unprocessed. And these refined vegetable oils come from seeds like corn oil, soybean oil is the bulk of what we eat. And in large quantities, and when they're heated in toxic ways and things are deep fried in them, they become inflammatory and toxic and promote disease. So I think we want to downsize those oils. We want to increase what we know are the good fats, the olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, fish oil. And then saturated fats, we shouldn't be so afraid of them, especially when we cut out the refined carbs and sugar. It's not a health food, but it's not harmful.
Now, you've talked before about the evils of sugar. And the last time we had you in our studio, we were talking about the blood sugar solution.
That's right.
And the blood sugar solution is don't eat a lot of sugar, in short. So where does sugar fit into this conversation?
Well, sugar is great. I mean, who doesn't love sugar? But I think of it as a recreational drug. I like to drink tequila, but I don't have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, cereal in America is mostly sugar. It should be called dessert, not breakfast. And I think we have it, again, hidden in everything. It's not the sugar that you add to your food. It's the sugar that's added by corporations in the factory that's hidden. So when you're having salad dressing, when you're having tomato sauce, when you're having, bread, all of it has added sugar. So we really need to think about that. And I think of sugar and flour as recreational drugs. I use them sparingly for fun and enjoyment occasionally.
Well, you said flour, and I think a lot of our listeners go, well, but flour's not sugar. I mean, what's wrong with the bagel? Come on.
Well, I love bagels. I'm Jewish. I love bagels. I think it's made ethically just so familiar to me. But the truth is, when you look at just the pure science, a glycemic index, which is how much a specific amount of food raises your blood sugar, sugar is 80. Bread is 100. So actually, your table sugar has a lower glycemic index than your bread. So you could have 2 tablespoons of sugar. It's better than having 2 slices of whole wheat bread for your sandwich.
Although we're not suggesting that people are...
No, I don't want you to do either. But I'm just saying, if you think about flour, you should think about it in the same way as sugar.
Whole wheat bread. I mean, now, see, there are a lot of people who go, but I've heard that brown bread, like, the kind I get at the supermarket, whole wheat bread is good for you.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of con job going on there. If you look at most of those, quote, whole wheat breads, it's mostly white flour with a few flecks of whole wheat in it. Even if it's whole wheat, if it's ground fine, it has a lot of surface area, it gets absorbed quickly. So my rule for bread is if you can stand on it and it doesn't squish, then you can eat it. Right? So German rye bread is an example. This great dark German rye bread is just whole kernel. It's made with the whole kernels. There's a great recipe online I saw called Life-Changing Bread, which is nuts and seeds and oats, and it's baked, and it's great. It's dense. And I used to visit friends in Germany. They had a meat slicer to cut the bread. You couldn't cut the bread with a knife. It was so dense. That's
you absolutely need it for that kind of bread.
It was like, exactly.
Dr. Hyman, I wonder if you would tell us about the cornerstones of your Eat Fat, Get Thin program, and how is it different from your blood sugar solution or from any of the other now very popular programs that are out there? We've talked with Dr. Lustig, we've talked with Dr. Ludwig.
Yes, all of them, all of the L's.
A lot of people are saying, let's stay away from carbs.
Yeah, all of us are saying the same thing. The truth is the science is the science is the science, and all of us have our different spin and have our different focus. But the truth is that the science is pretty evident. I mean, the last review was in Lancet looking at 53 randomized controlled trials of low-fat versus high-fat diets for weight loss, and the high-fat diets won out every time. And you mentioned Dr. Ludwig. He's one of the pioneers in this research. He showed if you have isocaloric diets, meaning the same calories, if you consume a high-fat diet, 60% versus 10% fat. If you're consuming a 60% fat diet, your calorie burning a day goes up 300 calories. That's like sitting on the couch doing nothing, and you get to burn 300 calories, like running an hour a day, just doing nothing on the couch. So we know that when you actually consume fat, it speeds up your metabolism, it turns off the hunger switch, it liberates fat from your fat cells. When you eat sugar and refined carbs, it does the opposite. It causes fat storage, it slows your metabolism, and it makes you super hungry. So the whole principle is to eat a very low glycemic diet, mostly plant foods. I call it a pegan diet because it's kind of a joke. I was with a friend who was a cardiologist, who was a vegan, another guy who was a close friend, a doctor, who was a paleo guy. I'm like, well, I'm in the middle. I must be a pegan. And I try to sort of say, what makes sense? And it's really a diet that's it's really very low in sugar and refined carbs, very high in plant foods, probably 70-80%, good quality fats, avocados, nuts and seeds, grass-fed meats, even good quality fish that has omega-3 fats, even coconut oil are all fine. And low in the starch, low in the grains and beans, but having all the variety of foods in your diet.
Not surprisingly, we have interviewed a lot of people who share your perspective. And when we do this, we get bombarded. Hate mail.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness, because there's the Dean Ornish group that go, wait a minute, Dr. Ornish says low fat, and then they're the China...
The China study folks,
right.
the T. Colin Campbell
and
folks.
they say, you guys got it all wrong.
Yeah. They're in the minority, unfortunately, now. You've got all those Harvard scientists like Walter Willett, Darius Mozaffarian, Dr. Ludwig. I mean, these are smart guys who spend their lives studying this, and they all really have come to the conclusion that fat's really not the enemy. The real issue around these, for example, Dr. Ornish, he's a pioneer, and he's done some amazing work. And, someone said a joke to me, says, someone said to a Vermont farmer, how's your wife? And he's like, well, compared to what? right? So yes, if you take someone and put them on a plant-based, low-fat diet that's vegan compared to the standard American diet, they are going to do better by far. And that's what they've showed. But if you compare it, for example, that diet to even a high-fat vegan diet, which Dr. David Jenkins has done, he found that the people who ate the higher-fat vegan diet actually lost more weight and had better cholesterol profiles. So I think there's real evidence, even on a plant-based diet, that eating higher-fat diets are helpful. And then, of course, there's all the interventional data. When you look at studies where you give people high-fat diets in the absence of refined carbs and sugar, you actually see better outcomes in diabetes, heart disease, all the biomarkers of heart disease, your cholesterol, inflammation, oxidative stress. So I think the evidence is pretty strong that eating higher fat diets in the context of a low refined carb and sugar diet, that's really important because you can't just go adding all that stuff to all your starch and sugar. That's going to be a killer. And I think that's a take home. No sweet fat. You will actually do really well.
So no sweet fat, and really the bread, the pasta, the pizza, all of that stuff, that needs to be,
it's a
as
recreational
you say,
drug.
that's once a week at most,
yeah,
right?
I mean, I might have pasta every 6 months.
Yeah.
I'll have bread maybe once a month. It's not a staple.
So what people are eating then is vegetables?
Yeah, I mean, the predominant diet we should have, and that's why I call it a pecan diet, it should be mostly a plant-based diet. Tons of veggies, nuts and seeds, some fruits. That's it. And some beans and grains. That's your diet. And then you add meat. I call it as a condiment. It's like meat is ketchup. and I wrote a lot about meat because I think it's such a confusing subject. I don't know if you want to get into that, but it's really a big area of controversy. And there's really three issues. One is moral. The second is environmental, and the third is health. And they get conflated a lot of the time. The moral, I have no argument. If you're a Buddhist monk and I have those as my patients, no problem. I can get them healthy on a vegan diet. Environmental factory farming of meat is a huge environmental crisis, contributing to climate change, degradation of air, water, soil, the use of antibiotics, GMOs. It's just a huge problem. Then there's the health issues. And what I turned around was that when you looked at meat from a health point of view, the meat eaters in the studies where it showed a problem were an unhealthy bunch. They ate more junk, they ate more sugar, exercised less, smoked more. When you compared vegetarians and meat eaters who shopped at health food stores, they actually both had their health risks reduced and reduced the risk of death by 50%. So take that home.
You're listening to Dr. Mark Hyman, director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. He's also chairman of the Institute for Functional Medicine and founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. His books include The Blood Sugar Solution, Ultra Prevention, and his most recent, Eat Fat, Get Thin, Why the Fat We Eat is the Key to Sustained Weight Loss and Vibrant Health.
And Terry, this sugar thing, and if we just cut back on the processed packaged foods, the sugar would pretty much disappear.
It would take care of itself.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about whether it makes sense to add any meat to a plant-based diet.
Is red meat the enemy?
Is the diet being recommended an elitist plan just for the wealthy?
And we'll talk about hospital food. There might be a way it could be made healthier.
Why is the diet program 21 days? Can you see real improvement in just 3 weeks?
We'll find out how this eating plan affects inflammation, the root of so many chronic diseases.
You'll also learn which fats are best. What else can you use besides olive oil?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with Shea Butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1030. That number again is 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're talking about how dietary decisions affect our health as well as our weight. Do you have low-fat yogurt in your refrigerator? Do you choose skim milk instead of cream for your coffee? Old habits die hard. But do they make sense?
Our guest is Dr. Mark Hyman. He's the Pritzker Foundation Chair and Director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. He's also the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. His books include The Blood Sugar Solution, Ultra Prevention, and his latest, Eat Fat, Get Thin, Why the Fat We Eat is the Key to Sustained Weight Loss and Vibrant Health.
Dr. Hyman, we've just been talking about the benefits of adding meat, certain types of meat, to a plant-based diet. So can you tell us, please, how you select the meat that you are going to eat yourself or the meat that you're going to recommend to your patients?
So, as I said, meat's a complicated story, and I reviewed really hundreds of papers on it. And I think the conclusions I came to is that in the context of an overall healthy plant-based diet, basically if you eat like a vegan with a little bit of meat, that it's a healthful way to eat. And it's something that we've been doing for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years as a species. When you select the meat, it matters what the quality is. And more and more research is coming out showing that grass-fed meats have a different profile than factory farm feedlot meats that are fed grain. They have higher levels of omega-3s, they have higher levels of vitamins and minerals, higher levels of antioxidants, different fat profiles that actually make them more healthful. However, they're more expensive, and I think that's a challenge. So I think we have to downsize our meat consumption, think of it as a condiment, or as I say, condiment. And I think that when I select them, I try to choose meats that are grown without antibiotics, without hormones, and ideally grass-fed if possible.
Well, there's still a lot of people who think red meat is my enemy. I don't care where it came from. And so the idea of beef is sort of sinful by definition.
Absolutely.
And there are people who think the same thing about lamb.
I think the evidence is so diverse. And I think when I really looked into it, a lot of the evidence comes from population studies. So then you have to look at, well, what were the characteristics of these populations? And they essentially ask people what they ate last week, what they ate last month. They do food frequency questionnaires, and they try to find correlations, right? But with the meat eaters, when they looked at the status of those meat eaters, they were the ones who were eating a generally crappy diet. They had 800 more calories a day. They had less fruits and vegetables. They had more processed foods, more sugar. They exercised less. They smoked more. They drank more, and they didn't take vitamins and minerals. Of course, they had more heart disease. But as I said, when you looked at the meat eaters who eat meat in the context of a healthy diet, when they shop at health food stores, their risks of death were cut in half.
Now, we aren't talking about processed meat. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, processed meat is like bologna, deli meats. Those have been linked to cancer. But again, the risks are relatively small. If you look at something called relative risk versus absolute risk, this is an important distinction. It's a little technical, but here goes. When you say, let's say, increase your risk from 1% of getting cancer to 2%, that's a 100% increase in risk. But it's only a 1% absolute risk. It's a 100% relative risk. So you have to be careful. Statistics can kind of get confusing. There was a book that I saw from the 50s called How to Lie with Statistics, and that's really a lot of times what happens. So yes, the cancer risk goes up about 30%, but it's a risk from about 2.4 to 3.2% of getting colon cancer. So I think it's small, it's real, but it's small.
Now, when I hear you talking about grass-fed meat, and I read in Eat Fat, Get Thin about selecting your eggs carefully, and I do. Mm-hmm. I mean, I am willing to pay twice as much to get eggs from the farmer where the chickens run around in the field. I know, I've been there, I've seen them, but I am paying twice as much per dozen as I would pay for regular eggs in the supermarket. Now, I happen to think they taste better, and they certainly look prettier because those yolks are nice and bright, and that's what you've recommended. Yeah, but does that mean that your diet is just an elitist diet for people who have enough money to spend on their grocery bills?
That's a totally fair question. And in fact, if you look at our system of food, there's a lot of inequity in it. And the reality, though, is, and I've actually done this with families, is work with them who really don't have a lot of resources. And I'm actually on the board of the Environmental Working Group, and there's a great guide called Good Food on a Tight Budget. And it's really a hierarchy of priorities, right? Yes, perfect world, we all have farm eggs, we all have grass-fed beef, but you don't have to. It's better to look at eating real whole food, and you can do that on a tight budget. And the Good Food on a Tight Budget shows what are the cheaper cuts of meat, what are the cheaper fruits and vegetables, what are the cheaper nuts and seeds, and how can you include those in your diet. And I went to a small family of 5 in South Carolina who did not know how to cook. I mean, they really had 2 generations of Americans that did not know how to cook. And it was part of the movie Fed Up, and I went into their home and I showed them how to cook a meal, turkey chili, salad, some roasted sweet potatoes, really simple, delicious food, some stir-fried asparagus. They loved it. And I said, here's the guide. You can do this. They lived on food stamps and disability. They had $1,000 a month for a family of 5 to eat. And they were able to do it, and they lost 200 pounds. Another family, the Stallmans, I went in Florida. I mean, they lost 335 pounds by eating real food. And I went to visit them. I said, you're having avocados and coconut butter and nuts and seeds. Isn't this breaking the bank? And they go like, no, because we're not going out to all these restaurants all the time eating fast food, and we're not buying, cases of soda for each member of the family every week. And, it was really shocking to me to hear them say that they could do it for less. And I think there's many research studies show that eating healthfully doesn't have to cost much more.
Well, you've just mentioned that the one family that you visited didn't know how to cook.
No.
Because the parents hadn't learned to cook, and so they couldn't teach their kids how to cook. So what about the importance of learning to cook? Isn't this a basic life skill every American should have?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tragedy what happened. We've been disenfranchised from our kitchens. The food industry has hijacked our kitchens intentionally. There was a grand gathering in the 50s to create convenience as a value, and basically they invented Betty Crocker. And Betty Crocker was not a real person. The cookbook included all these processed foods, like put Ritz crackers on top of your, broccoli, or can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup in the recipe. And they've ended home ec classes in schools. And we've really hijacked. We had TV dinners, and then we had all these processed foods. So now Americans don't know how to cook. They watch more cooking on television than actually cooking themselves. And we have to bring this back. I spent the weekend a couple weeks ago in Cleveland at a hospital teaching 300 women how to cook. I mean, why is a doctor in a hospital teaching women how to cook? Because we've just lost that skill, and it's so critical.
Well, you mentioned hospital. The food that most people get in hospitals is like, bleh. Not only doesn't it taste very good, but it's pretty far away from what you're talking about. How do we change that? Because a hospital should be a place where not only do you get better because of surgeons and other great healthcare professionals, but also because the food will be healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if food is medicine, then why are we prescribing things that actually are going to promote more disease after people have surgery or in the hospital? And we're at Cleveland Clinic working on that. It's high on the agenda of Toby Cosgrove. We're working with food service providers that are sort of stuck and entrenched, and it's just a challenging situation.
Same thing in cafeterias. But let's go back to the 21-day part of your program. I mean, why 21 days? Can you actually see improvement in 3 weeks?
You can see improvement in days. It's pretty extraordinary. When you take out the bad stuff and put in the good stuff, the body has an amazing capacity to heal. I call it, it's like hitting the reset button or turning your body back to its original factory settings. And when we had 1,000 people do this, they lost about 7,000 pounds. Their blood sugar dropped on average 23 points, blood pressure 10 points, and their cravings went away. 80% had cravings most of the time or all the time. And after the fat literally turns the brain craving center off. And even more importantly to me as a physician, people felt better. They had what I call FLC syndrome. That's when you feel like crap. That's when you have, little achiness, sinus issues, digestive problems, reflux, bloating, joint pain, headaches, you name it, depression, fatigue, insomnia. These things get better when you take out the bad stuff and put in the good stuff. And there was a 68% reduction in all symptoms from all diseases. So yes, you feel better and you feel better fast. People get off insulin literally in days when you switch them out. I had a patient who changed his way of eating in just 1 day. He said his sugar came from 250 to 100. I've had other people get off insulin in 3 or 4 days. It's pretty dramatic.
Now, you've said that inflammation is kind of the root of so many of our chronic diseases, the diabetes, the Alzheimer's disease, asthma, allergies, I don't know what else.
Cancer, diabetes, obesity.
So how does your plan address inflammation?
Well, the biggest driver of inflammation is, guess what? Sugar and refined carbs. And that is the biggest driver. And I think to some degree, refined oils. And the good fats actually help lower inflammation in the body. And we see this over and over again, whether it's the omega-3 fats, the olive oils, they actually reduce inflammation. So eating the right fats, cutting out the bad fats, cutting out the refined sugar and refined starchy carbs, eating lots of plant foods, which are naturally anti-inflammatory. Those all will naturally reduce inflammation.
So I want to really drill down into the fat stuff. So what do we cook with? Yeah, we've heard about olive oil. I'm tired of hearing about olive oil. Everybody has
Even
heard
though
this story.
we do
like olive
use
oil.
olive oil.
We cook our eggs in olive oil. We cook everything in olive oil. But what else? I mean, we hear so much about rapeseed oil, which is also known as
Canola.
I mean, I think
oil.
the general principle, I would say, is to use a few basic fats for cooking and using in your food. And the rest, get your fats naturally from food. So what I have in my kitchen is extra virgin olive oil, which I tend not to cook with, at least at high temperatures, because any oil heated at high temperatures can become toxic.
Well, wait a minute. There are some foods that have to be cooked at high heat, like in the wok.
For a minute.
Well, but
Yes.
so what would
So
you use?
you can use coconut oil, which is actually more stable at high temperatures.
But it is saturated fat.
Oh, yes, it is. But we talked about that. I'm not so worried about it.
So it's okay. You can use that. It's a good cooking oil.
And then and you can use ghee or butter. Again, not super high heats because they smoke. So if it smokes, that's bad. And you can use sometimes sesame oil or avocado oils, but not in huge quantities. And I think all the other refined vegetable oils. I mean, what is vegetable oil anyway? You see these bottles that says vegetable oil on it. What is that? When there's rapeseed oil or canola oil, which we thought was healthy, it's really highly processed.
Yeah, we keep hearing that, we were told for the last 2 decades, oh, yeah, canola oil's the good stuff.
Well, it's challenging because we may not want to get into this, but the data was confusing because what they did was they showed people who had more PUFAs or polyunsaturated fats had less heart disease. And if you substituted that for saturated fat, you did better because it lowered cholesterol. But what they didn't do was separate out the effect of the omega-3s and the omega-6s, which are from refined vegetable oils or the fish oil. When you combine them, the fish oil is protective. But when you just look at the refined omega-6s alone, not so helpful.
So which oils should we probably not be cooking with?
I think we shouldn't be cooking with all those refined vegetable oils, soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, all those oils, safflower oil, all those oils that are in the supermarket that we're supposed to cook in, probably not. And frying things is really a bad idea. Like deep frying, no matter how good it tastes, it's not great for you.
So when you go to a fast food restaurant and they are frying fish, must be good for you, but what are they using?
Well, it's changed actually. It was soybean oil, hydrogenated soybean oil or trans fat, which was pretty terrible. And they got rid of that. And now it's refined vegetable oils, which are supposedly better, but when you heat them at those high temperatures, they easily become toxic and rancid and very dangerous.
And of course, the only place you're going to actually eat something that's been deep fried is going out, because
Who has a deep fryer at their house?
Doing it at home, it's so messy.
That's right. I would say, if you want to have French fries, make them yourself. You're not going to do it that often. And okay, so you have some French fries, you fry them, and you do it, but not something you have every day.
Okay. So as you begin to look in your pantry and begin to say, okay, this is what you should have for breakfast. This is what you should have for lunch. This is dinner. You always have recipes, and you've got recipes in Eat Fat, Get Thin. So give us
my go-to?
Your go-to.
Yeah,
I'm super busy, so honestly, I don't have that much time for recipes except on the weekend or when I have friends over. So I have 2 breakfasts. I call it the Fat Shake. So the Fat Shake would be nuts and seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, almonds, almond butter, coconut butter, blueberries, coconut milk. Put in the blender, 3 minutes, I got breakfast. And it's fat and protein and antioxidants from the blueberries. Or I have eggs. I have eggs that I'll lightly fry or poach. I'll have an avocado slice, maybe stir-fried greens, and I'll pour olive oil on it. So I'll have fat on fat on fat. For lunch, I'll have what I call a fat salad, which is lots of greens, avocados, which have fat, olives, which have fat, pumpkin seeds, which have fat, either a can of wild salmon, which has fat, and then I put olive oil on top of all that. So it's fat on fat on fat on fat. That's my lunch. And then dinner is basically a small piece of protein. It could be a piece of fish like wild salmon. It could be lamb chop, and then tons of veggies. So you look at my plate, I probably have like a heaping pile the size of a small football on my plate, and then maybe half a sweet potato. That's my dinner. And then if I want dessert, I'll make ice cream. And I make ice cream by taking a can of coconut milk, which is good fat, and frozen blackberries, and I put them in the blender, and it's this creamy, luscious, delicious. You don't have to put sugar in it. It's just yummy, and it's a great thing to serve for friends and guests. They won't know they're eating something healthy.
Well, that sounds like a winner. I love this idea of blackberry coconut ice cream. I'm going to try that.
It's good. It's so easy.
So what do you want the health professionals who are listening to us today to take home, and our listeners who are not necessarily health professionals? Why is it that people should be eating fat to get thin?
Well, I think it's important that, doctors try to keep up with the science of fat, because this is a big paradigm shift. And this is not just my idea, but this is just mounting evidence, looking at the literature. And the government finally has come along, and they're one of the last people to come along. So if they said it's okay to eat more fat, well, it kind of is. And I think we have to understand that this whole calorie myth is driving so much of the problem with obesity in this country. It's all about exercise more, eat less. And the implicit message is you're blaming the fat person for being a lazy glutton instead of realizing it's not an energy balance issue, it's an information issue, that food is information, not just calories, and it has instructions, and it can regulate hormones, neurotransmitters, metabolism in very different ways depending on the quality of those calories. So focus on the quality of the calories, on the what to eat, and you don't have to focus so much on the how much.
Dr. Mark Hyman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
No, thank you so much for having me here. I love People's Pharmacy and public radio.
You've been listening to Dr. Mark Hyman. He's the Pritzker Foundation Chair and Director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. He's also the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. His books include The Blood Sugar Solution, Ultra Prevention, and Ultra Metabolism. His latest is Eat Fat, Get Thin: Why the Fat We Eat is the Key to Sustained Weight Loss and Vibrant Health. His website is eatfatgetthin.com, where you'll find free questions and answer information on his approach.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wadarsky is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream, with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
And if you would like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1030. That number again, 800-732-2334. You can also find it at our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our website, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your own experience and your thoughts about today's show. Be sure to check out our Listen and Read offer, combining Dr. Hyman's book, Eat Fat, Get Thin, with a CD of today's show.
When you're at the website, you could also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You need never miss another People's Pharmacy program. You can even share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks very much for listening. Please do join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.